Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're enjoying these untold Hollywood secrets, please hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking celebrity revelations. Your support means the world to us. Now let's get into this amazing story. It was March 15, 1985, and Clint Eastwood was sitting in his office at Malpaso Productions when his phone rang. On the other end was David Begelman, the head of MGM Studios, and what he was about to tell Clint would leave the legendary actor speechless. "Clint," Begelman said, his voice cold and professional, "we're making some changes to Pale Rider. We're bringing in a new director." Clint couldn't believe what he was hearing. "A new director?" "David, I am the director. This is my movie. I developed it. I'm producing it. I'm starring in it." "Not anymore," Begelman replied. "The studio has lost confidence in your vision. We think the project needs fresh leadership." In that moment, Clint Eastwood experienced something that had never happened to him before in his 30-year career. He was being fired from his own movie. What happened next would become one of the most shocking betrayals in Hollywood history, and it would change Clint Eastwood forever. Now, let me back up here and explain how one of the most powerful men in Hollywood ended up being stabbed in the back by the very people he trusted. The story of Pale Rider began 2 years earlier, in 1983, when Clint came up with the idea for a Western that would serve as both a tribute to and a deconstruction of the classic Shane story. Clint had been developing the project personally for months. He had written parts of the script, scouted locations, and assembled a cast and crew. This wasn't just another movie for him, it was a passion project that he believed would be his masterpiece. Pale Rider was Clint's baby, recalled producer Fritz Maines, who worked closely with Clint during this period. He had put his heart and soul into every aspect of this film. Clint had financed much of the early development himself through his production company Malpaso Productions. He owned the rights to the story, had hired the writers, and had spent over a year in pre-production. When MGM agreed to distribute the film, it seemed like the perfect partnership. MGM would provide the marketing muscle and theater connections, while Clint would deliver what everyone expected to be another hit Western. But things started going wrong almost immediately. The first sign of trouble came when MGM executives began questioning Clint's creative decisions. They didn't like his choice of cinematographer. They thought his casting decisions were too risky. They wanted him to add more action sequences and reduce the philosophical elements of the story. MGM wanted Clint to make another Dirty Harry movie with horses, explained screenwriter Michael Butler. They didn't understand that Clint was trying to create something more sophisticated. Clint tried to accommodate some of their requests, but he drew the line when they asked him to completely rewrite the ending to make it more audience-friendly. "This is my story," Clint told the MGM executives during a heated meeting. "If you don't trust my vision, maybe you shouldn't be involved in this project." That comment would come back to haunt him. Actually, let me tell you about what was really going on behind the scenes, because the situation was much more complicated than anyone realized at the time. David Begelman, the head of MGM, had his own agenda. He was under pressure from the studio's board of directors to prove that he could control the big-name directors and actors who had been running wild with budgets and creative freedom. Clint Eastwood, with his reputation for independence and his history of successful films, was seen as a test case. If Begelman could bring Clint to heel, he could control anyone. Begelman wanted to make an example of Clint, said former MGM executive Peter Bart. He wanted to show the entire industry that no one was bigger than the studio system. But Begelman wasn't working alone. He had convinced several MGM board members that Clint was too old, too set in his ways, and too expensive to continue as a leading man and director. Wait until you hear what they were saying about him in private. According to leaked memos that surfaced years later, MGM executives were calling Clint yesterday's news and suggesting that the studio needed to move beyond the Eastwood era. One particularly damning memo from Begelman to the MGM board read, "Eastwood's appeal is limited to an aging demographic. We need to develop projects that will attract younger audiences, not cater to his outdated sensibility. When Clint learned about these memos months later, he was devastated, but the real betrayal was yet to come. In February 1985, just weeks before filming was scheduled to begin, MGM secretly began negotiating with other directors to take over Pale Rider. They approached George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and even Sergio Leone, all without telling Clint what they were doing. It was the ultimate act of disrespect, said Clint's longtime agent, Leonard Hirschon. They were shopping around his own project behind his back. The first Clint heard about any of this was when a reporter called him asking for a comment about rumors that he was being replaced on Pale Rider. Clint immediately called Begelman, demanding to know what was going on. "David, I'm hearing stories that you're talking to other directors about my movie," Clint said. "Please tell me these are just rumors." Begelman's response was cold and calculated. "Clint, we're exploring all our options. The studio needs to protect its investment." "Protect your investment?" Clint exploded. "I am your investment. This is my movie." "Not anymore," Begelman replied. "The board has made its decision. We're bringing in fresh talent." That's when Clint learned that MGM had already signed a deal with director Michael Cimino to take over Pale Rider. Michael Cimino, the same director whose previous film, Heaven's Gate, had been one of the biggest disasters in Hollywood history. Clint couldn't believe it. MGM was firing him, the man who had never made a losing movie, and replacing him with someone who had nearly destroyed United Artists with his last project. It was insanity, Clint said years later. They were choosing failure over success because they wanted to prove a point about power. Don't forget to comment below and let us know what other Hollywood betrayals you'd like to hear about. The betrayal got even worse when Clint discovered that people he considered friends had been involved in the conspiracy to remove him. His own lawyer, who had been negotiating the MGM deal, had apparently known about the studio's plans for weeks and hadn't warned Clint. Several actors who were supposed to be in the film suddenly became unavailable when they learned that Clint was being replaced. Even some members of his own production team began distancing themselves from the project. It was like watching rats abandon a sinking ship, recalled Fritz Mainz. People who had been loyal to Clint for years suddenly turned their backs on him. But the most painful betrayal came from his longtime producing partner, Robert Daly. Daly had worked with Clint on dozens of films and was supposed to be one of his closest allies in Hollywood. But when MGM offered Daly a lucrative deal to stay on Pale Rider with the new director, he accepted. "Bob's betrayal hurt Clint more than anything else," said a close friend of Clint's. He had trusted this man with his career, his money, and his friendship. To have him choose MGM over loyalty, it nearly broke Clint's spirit. When Clint confronted Daly about his decision, the conversation was brutal. "Bob, how can you stay on this project after what they've done to me?" Clint asked. "It's just business, Clint," Daly replied. "I have to think about my future." "Your future," Clint said, his voice filled with hurt and anger. "What about our friendship? What about loyalty? What about doing what's right?" Daly's response was devastating. "This is Hollywood, Clint. Loyalty doesn't pay the bills." That conversation ended their friendship forever. The emotional toll on Clint was enormous. People who knew him during this period said he became withdrawn, bitter, and deeply suspicious of everyone around him. "Clint was a different person after the Pale Rider betrayal," said actress Sandra Locke, who was in a relationship with Clint at the time. "He had always been somewhat guarded, but after this, he trusted no one." Clint's confidence, which had been unshakable for decades, was completely destroyed. For the first time in his career, Clint started questioning whether he was still relevant, said biographer Richard Schickel. The betrayal made him wonder if his time in Hollywood was over. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because Clint's response to this betrayal was both devastating and brilliant. Instead of accepting defeat, Clint decided to fight back in the most effective way possible. He decided to prove MGM wrong. First, he reclaimed the rights to Pale Rider. Since he had developed the project and owned much of the underlying material, he had legal grounds to prevent MGM from moving forward with their version. The legal battle was vicious and expensive, But Clint had more determination than MGM had money. Clint spent over $2 million of his own money fighting MGM in court, recalled his attorney. He was willing to bankrupt himself to prove a point. After 6 months of legal warfare, MGM finally gave up. They couldn't make Pale Rider without Clint's cooperation, and he wasn't going to give it to them. But Clint didn't stop there. He took the project to Warner Brothers, who were happy to work with him on his terms. The Pale Rider that eventually got made was exactly the movie Clint had originally envisioned. No compromises, no studio interference, no betrayals. When the film was released in 1985, it was both a critical and commercial success. It made over $41 million at the box office and received rave reviews from critics who praised Clint's direction and performance. But more importantly, it proved that Clint Eastwood was still a force to be reckoned with in Hollywood. The success of Pale Rider was a public humiliation for MGM and David Begelman. They had bet against Clint Eastwood and lost spectacularly, said entertainment journalist Nikki Fink. It made them look like fools. Begelman was forced to resign from MGM within a year of the Pale Rider debacle. The board of directors who had supported the decision to fire Clint were also replaced. Michael Cimino, the director they had chosen to replace Clint, never directed another major studio film after the scandal broke. But the most satisfying revenge came when Pale Rider won several major film awards, and Clint was nominated for a Directors Guild Award for his work. In his acceptance speech at the Directors Guild ceremony, Clint made a subtle but pointed reference to his MGM experience. This award belongs to everyone who believes that loyalty and integrity still matter in this business. And to everyone who thinks that betrayal is just another business strategy, you're wrong. The room erupted in applause, and everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Actually, you know what's really interesting? The Pale Rider betrayal changed how Clint approached his entire career. After this experience, he became much more careful about his business relationships. He started demanding more control over his projects, and became extremely selective about which studios he would work with. The betrayal taught Clint that he could only rely on himself, said producer Paul Lipman. From that point on, he never fully trusted anyone in Hollywood again. This newfound independence actually made Clint's career stronger. His subsequent films, including Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby, were made entirely on his terms, with no studio interference. Both films won Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Director, proving that Clint's instincts were better than any studio executive. The people who betrayed Clint during the Pale Rider incident all suffered consequences for their actions. Robert Daly never worked with a major star again, after word of his betrayal spread through Hollywood. Other actors and directors refused to work with someone they couldn't trust. David Begelman's career never recovered from the humiliation. He was essentially blacklisted from major studios, and spent his final years working on low-budget independent film. The MGM executives who had conspired against Clint found themselves unemployable when their memos and private conversations were leaked to the press. Hollywood is a small town, explained entertainment lawyer Jake Bloom. When you betray someone as respected as Clint Eastwood, word gets around. Nobody wants to work with people they can't trust. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the Pale Rider betrayal was how it inspired Clint to help other filmmakers who were being mistreated by studios. In the years following his own experience, Clint became an advocate for directors' rights and creative independence. He used his influence to protect younger filmmakers from the kind of corporate betrayal he had experienced. Clint never wanted anyone else to go through what he went through, said director Ron Howard, who benefited from Clint's mentorship. He made sure that other artists had the support and protection he didn't have during the MGM betrayal. When Clint received the Irving Thalberg Memorial Award from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 1995, his acceptance speech focused on the importance of artistic integrity and loyalty in filmmaking. The movies that matter, he said, are made by people who believe in each other and stand by each other, even when it's difficult. Betrayal might be profitable in the short term, but loyalty and integrity are what create lasting art. Looking back at the Pale Rider betrayal, it's clear that what seemed like the worst thing that could happen to Clint Eastwood actually made him stronger. The experience taught him that he couldn't depend on studios or executives, or even longtime partners to protect his interests. But it also taught him that he had the strength and determination to fight back against any betrayal and emerge victorious. The day Clint Eastwood was fired from his own movie was supposed to be the day his career ended. Instead, it was the day he learned that he was tougher than anyone who tried to destroy him. MGM thought they could break Clint Eastwood's spirit by betraying his trust and stealing his project. But they only succeeded in proving that some people are unbreakable, and that betrayal, no matter how carefully planned or ruthlessly executed, is no match for talent, determination, and the will to survive. Clint Eastwood had the last laugh, and it was louder than any gunshot in any of his Western movies.